Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our next story submission. Today we have Jessica with us. Jessica, thank you so much for being with us here today and
Thank you for having
being
me.
brave and sharing your stories. I'm just going to hand it over to you and encourage you to start wherever you want and include whatever you want. And I'll have some questions at the end.
Okay, I'm excited. So I first started therapy when I was 4 years old, when my parents divorced, and I'm really privileged that I had access to it through my school. So for the first probably 18 years of my life, I was purely doing psychodynamic therapy. And it was very helpful to get an alternative perspective and to get down and dig to the roots of every single thing as to why I behave the way I do and really figure out that there's a reason behind my behavior and to try and change my behavior that way. But I've realized as I've gotten older and I've heard so many people say, I don't like therapy because I don't want to sit and just talk about my feelings and talk about why I'm sad. But there's so many different types of talk therapy, whether it's CB, cognitive behavioral, dialectical, psychodynamic, there's so much variety. So in my adulthood, it's been exciting to explore different types of therapy that isn't just the reason I behave like this is because when I was a child, my dad didn't love me, etc. Da, 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 da. So it's been really cool. Even, and the thing is too, it sounds so dumb. Like everything I've learned in therapy just sounds ridiculous because it's like the most common sense stuff. I like with dialectical behavioral therapy. When I start to get really emotional, okay, I'm going to count to 10. I'm going to drink a cup of tea. I'm going to go for a walk. And when you're dysregulated like that, you're like, this is ridiculous. I don't want to do this. It seems so petty. And then after the fact, I'm like, oh, I'm calm now. And I went for the walk and I drank the tea. So it can be hard in therapy because the answer seems so clear. Executing them is tricky, which is why I have been going on and off to therapy my whole life, because as much as you can go in there and master those skills, you have to keep up with them. You can't just go in and get cured and say, I've solved all my problems and my childhood trauma is cured. It's something that you have to constantly keep up with. I know I was doing cognitive behavioral therapy for self-esteem stuff. And again, it sounded so trivial. Positive self-talk, reconditioning my thought patterns. I'm ugly. Then I sit down and break down the thought. Is it true? Maybe. Is it helpful? No. What can I say instead? That I'm hungry and going to go eat a piece of pizza. But at first, I was telling myself lies. My therapist was like, lie to yourself. Say everything you don't believe. I'm the most beautiful, amazing person that's ever lived on the planet. And every time I said it, it was a lie. I was like, this is silly. And then 6 months later, I just believed these things. And I was like, oh my God. So when I'm sitting there telling myself over and over, I suck, I believe I suck. And if I just entertain what feels like the delusion of I'm awesome, eventually I've realized it. But since I've been out of therapy and I haven't been practicing those skills, it's crazy how quick they can catch up with you. And you need to do a reset and have somebody else to bounce off of to be able to get back to that point to where you were. So I think therapy is such a valuable asset. I have been trying to convince everyone on earth to get in therapy since I was really young, but I think a lot of people's apprehension is that they think they're just going to sit there and cry and talk about sad things that happen to them. And that very much can be your journey if that's what you need or if that's what you want. But there's so many different types of therapy and different ways of helping with whatever problems you have, or even if you don't have problems, even if nothing's wrong and you want to maintain that, a great way is to talk to a professional. Another thing I've noticed as well is a lot of times in therapy, I'm just talking the whole time and they're just staring at me, and just knowing, looking at them and imagining what their response is going to be, I can solve so many of my own discrepancies in and of itself by literally just talking to someone else and hearing my own thoughts out loud. That's another thing that's amazing about being in therapy and starting to journal and write things down, is when you get it out of your head and you see it or you hear it outside, you're like, that's a little wonky. I don't know if I should be thinking like that. So I was very excited when I saw on your guys' social media that you're trying to share people's stories with therapy, because I think there is a big stigma of people who think that it's soft or weak, or you just sit in here and cry and you're going to sit on the couch with a notepad and say, oh, you're inner child. But every single person needs something different. And you guys are the professionals at being able to tell what is going to be helpful and what is going to make them come back and not come. Shouldn't have said it like that. What is going to make them come and help their problems rather than just coming once and being like, I'm out of here. I'm not doing this again. So yeah, I'm really grateful that strength counseling is going online, going on social media and trying to spread the word in these positive messages.
That's wonderful, Jessica. Yeah, we're so passionate about what we do. And we've been in business now for 13 years. So we've helped or supported
Mm,
people in helping themselves for that period of time. And I just thought it's time to show the world how effective this is.
yes.
Right. And over the past, I would say, decade, maybe even more, we've seen more and more movements coming out that are supporting getting help for your mental health, just the same as you would get help for your physical health.
Mhm.
And so it just warms my heart to hear you talk about this and how important it's been in your life. You talked about when you started therapy at age 4, and
Mhm.
then you've been on and off in therapy throughout your
Mhm.
life. Can you talk about even all or even some of the situations that led you to go to therapy? And if it was of your own choice or if you
Mhm.
were coerced into it by parents or
Yeah.
caregivers, or what that looked like starting from when you were just little?
Yeah. So when I was 4 and my parents split, they just thought it would be a good idea to put me and my brother in therapy because we had the resource and I'm from Alberta and not many people were utilizing the mental health opportunities. So I got to have it all to myself. But at the time, I was so young, I didn't even know what was happening. I was just going in there and like playing games and talking about my life. And at the time, I didn't realize like how important it was to have a professional monitoring my behavior and giving input to my parents on these are things that you can do to help with her behavior. But at the time, I had absolutely no idea what was going on. At 14 is when I started to develop depression, anxiety, all my mental health disorders. I got a list of acronyms. And so I was in a treatment center for 6 months actually, what that was intensive therapy, like 2 hours of group a day, 1 hour with a psychologist a week, and I was in there for 6 months, and that was the most powerful thing that ever happened to me in my life. As a 16-year-old girl that wasn't allowed to have her cell phone for 6 months, it wasn't so fun. But being in a therapy environment 24/7, like fast tracking all the 16 years up until that point of things that happened to me really made me realize the power of therapy because I went in there and came out of there 2 totally different people. After that, I guess, yeah, when I was 18, I was struggling with identity a lot. I'm like, "Who am I? What do I wanna do? What do I wanna go to school for?" So, I was back in therapy then trying to figure out who I am. I didn't know at the time I had borderline personality disorder, which the symptom is this loss like, lack of a sense of identity, so retrospectively, it all makes sense now. But, yeah, so since I've been an adult for the last 10 years, I've been in and out of therapy with the waves of my depression, but the problem is that I start going to therapy when I start getting depressed, rather than maintaining it when I'm doing well so that I can make sure that I'm, like, putting those skills in my life so that I can maintain how I'm feeling. Even if it's not weekly, maybe if it's monthly or it's just a check-in, I think in the future, I'm gonna do that because it prevents me from, "Okay, I'm doing therapy, I'm doing good. Now I'm cured, let me stay here." But then stuff goes back down, obviously, if you don't practice your skills. But yeah, I've had a long-standing relationship with therapy, but it's always been something that I've been willing to do and open to do because I'm like an over-communicator. My parents, I grew had a very chaotic upbringing, and I just wanted to talk about it, and my parents didn't wanna talk about it. So I loved sitting with a therapist and blah, 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 talking the ear off. And another valuable thing too that I've found being an influencer and posting online and just talking about my life and having people relate to me on things that I didn't know other people thought was unique to them. So another thing with therapy was going in there and saying, I feel XYZ or XYZ happened to me, and them saying, oh yeah, that happens to a lot of people. And you being like, I'm not alone. There's a reason behind this. There's a way that I can so many people live with shame their whole lives for, like, intrusive thoughts or nightmares that they have or things like that, and as scary as it is to tell someone, the weight off your shoulders when you realize that these things you thought you could tell no one else, other people already are dealing with and thinking about is it makes it a lot easier to walk through the world and not feel just the constant pressure and anxiety of the world coming down on you. But I need to get there in therapy again. And your social media post saying we're doing these story submissions and watching the one that you did with Alyssa McLeave really motivated me. And I was like, I need to get back in this again. I need to do it again. Winter's coming. The rain is coming. And I need to get my mental health as if the sun was here.
Yeah, Jessica, I think I've been taking some notes while you've been talking, and there's a few things I want to comment on and also want to ask. And something that I love what you said is you said, I don't wait until I'm having a lot of trouble to get therapy. I get therapy when I start to notice the symptoms of depression. So
Mm,
you might still be having like a fantastic day and you're like, oh, I just I'm noticing something's different for me
mhm,
than it was last week or yesterday or whatever it is.
mhm,
Let's just do a checkup,
mhm,
because when you don't wait and you just do a checkup, the likelihood of you falling into that deep place of darkness that
mhm.
a lot of us have experienced is very small.
Yeah,
Whereas if you wait and you're not doing the exercises, because honestly, when we're depressed, we don't want to. Like,
exactly. That's the whole
let's just be
problem.
clear.
That
Like, we
that
don't want, and it's simple stuff, like you said, like to 10 and
yes.
notice your breath. And there's hundreds of thousands of different things that are so
Mhm,
simple that you can do. We just don't want to. And I've been there too, laying on the couch, flat out, crying all the time, can't connect with my friends, don't have a job, totally
mhm,
depressed. And it's beautiful outside. And I don't want to go outside.
mhm,
Right. So I love this so much that you're
mhm.
advocating for, do it when you notice a shift. Don't
And
wait
also
too long.
and also do it out of spite. When I started dialectical behavioral therapy, I wanted to prove to that therapist that what she was saying was not going to work for me. And it might work for everybody else, but it's not going to work for me. When I'm crying my eyes out and she says, I want you to write down on this piece of paper, blah, blah, blah. I was like, fine, I'm going to do it. And I would do it. And then this is like what I was saying. I would go and for a and I would drink the tea and I'd take a bath and I'd be so mad. And then after the fact, I'd be like, calm down, like making dinner. And I'd be like, oh, I was so upset earlier. I did those things I thought were so stupid that the therapist gave me to calm down. And I was trying to prove her wrong, but I didn't even realize that I calmed down and everything's fine now and I'm already over it. So clearly it worked. And I would get to go to her and say, you know what? You win. This isn't a win-lose. I guess we're both winning. But even if you don't necessarily have to believe therapy is going to work, you don't have to believe or have any expectations of what you're going to get out of it. You can just go in there and be like, what's up? Let's see. What are the vibes? Is this going to make me feel good? Is this. And another thing, too, I think a lot of people don't realize therapy doesn't always feel good. In fact, a lot of time therapy is exhausting and emotionally intense, and you're crying. And then afterwards, you need to take a nap. And the longer you go, the better it feels. And you can start to walk out of there and feel refreshed and recharged. And I think that's another thing that discourages people. They think that they're going to walk in that room and have some epiphany and come out and hallelujah, I'm going to go apply for a raise or something. But it very much can be like a slow, incremental process that almost feels like it's getting worse before it gets better because you've been hiding all these feelings and things that you're going through for so long. So when you start to open that up and try to dig through it, it can be a very overwhelming process. So I think it's important for people to keep in mind that learning and growing it's messy. It's not always I'm sad and I'm going to go there and I'm going to leave happy. Like it's a process.
Absolutely. I've had a lot of people say that I didn't trust you.
Mhm.
And I learned that through the process. I learned that sometimes I just had to trust you, even though I didn't trust you and I didn't want to trust you.
Yeah.
And eventually I kept showing up. I kept supporting them. I kept pushing them to do the things that they didn't want to do.
Yeah.
And eventually we see there's this top layer that releases of
Mhm.
like angst and pain
Mhm.
and the symptoms of whatever diagnosis that person had. And it lifts and it's, wow, okay, life is actually a little bit better.
Yeah.
Right. And then therapy continues and then another layer lifts, but it might be 3 months or more before another layer lifts.
Yeah.
And in that, we might struggle a lot with experiencing feelings that we don't know how to process. And
And
so
we
we
don't want
come,
to. We don't want I don't want to feel
why can't I
bad.
just go and have
Avoid
fun
it.
with my
That's what it
friends?
is. Like you avoid something for so long and then you got to deal with all of it.
That's right. And that goes back to not waiting too
Mhm.
long.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, so we do couples here and individual, and a lot of times we'll have people come in a couple situation and they're like breaking up.
Yeah,
Like
they're
they're
ready
like
to
done.
divorce.
they're done with each other. And we're like, oh my goodness, why did you wait so long, Ryan? And oftentimes in cases like that, they're so done already. They're just
Mhm.
looking for an amicable way to
Mm.
do it.
Mhm.
And so I just implore people, start early. If you notice something shifting and things aren't quite
Mhm.
right, and then you don't feel good in your body, and there's lots and lots of reasons for just checking in. I love that you talked about your willingness to do therapy. You were excited about it, even though it was painful for you at times.
Yeah.
I can only imagine a 16-year-old girl in an intensive treatment facility not being able to have her phone. I was 16 too. I
It was
know all about
oh my
that.
god.
Right? And you did it. Not
Uh-huh.
only did you stay for 6 months, but you've learned from that and you've grown into a healthier person
Mhm.
largely because of that and your experience before too. But I'm curious, Jessica, can you tell us more about being in this treatment center? Anything you're willing to, why you were there, what it
Yeah.
was about,
Mhm.
what you needed support with, and why you chose to stay for 6 months? Because
Yeah.
that's a long time.
Yeah, it's a long time. So when I was 16, when I was 14, my mental health problems started. And also, I have ADHD. So if I'm jumping all over the place and make no sense, I would just like to point that would be why if you need to help
No
me stay
problem.
on
No
track
problem. I
here.
got it. I got it.
But I didn't know that when I was 16. So school was very difficult. I have a lot of physical health problems. So I ended up developing an addiction to opioids. I just wanted to feel numb. I didn't want to feel anything. I was sad. I couldn't relate to my peers because I had a very dysfunctional home life that not everybody else could relate to. And it was bad. And at that point, as much as I was at the point where it's okay, either I'm going to do something drastic. So go to this treatment center or the alternative is the worst case scenario. So I was like so desperate that I was like, whatever. I'm very privileged that I have an aunt that was working in the mental health community. And so she was able to get me into a program called Casa House in Sherwood Park, Alberta. And so I agreed to go before I knew they took my phone. And then when I got there, I was like, okay. But part of the thing that encouraged me was they were gonna feed me 3 times a day. I was like, "Ooh, I don't have to cook. I don't have to make a lunch. Love that." This was a big test of, is the issue the environment you're growing up in? Is the issue the people, your parents that you're around all the time? If we take you out of that environment and we do these therapies, is it gonna be more successful? So, I was very open to knowing who's the problem here. So, again, that was another situation of doing it out of spite. But there was a lot of times where, in those 6 months, I did not wanna be there. There was especially because it was for minors, so people who are under 18, and I'm 16, and I grew up a little too quick. So, again, I couldn't really relate to my peers. I'd never been disciplined in my entire life, and there is rules in this institution, and there's no way for me to get around them. Oh, yeah, I didn't always wanna be there. There was times where I literally wanted to break out because I wasn't allowed to leave. I couldn't just come and go as I pleased. So there was nights where I was like, "I can't do this anymore." But over those 6 months, it completely changed me. Sitting in group therapy, I'd never been in group therapy before, and just hearing other people's problems and being able to give your input and help them a little bit, and then have them do the same. So I was able to connect with my peers in certain ways where I felt like maybe I was more alone or I couldn't connect with other people. So that was one of the most valuable experiences in my life. And they were right, because the second I was out of there and went back home, things got a little messy again. But I'm very privileged, especially to live in a country like Canada, because that was covered by healthcare, and the fact that I had access to that resource, I I can't even explain how much that changed my life. I frankly don't think I would be here if I didn't have that opportunity, and that got me really into psychology. I started my undergrad in psychology because being in that environment just made me wanna change the life of teens, because I realized how simple it was for these, like, social workers and psychologists and counselors to completely transform people's lives and everything they their identity and the way they think about themselves and the way they view the world. It can be, like, such a negative, traumatizing way, and seeing the impact these people had on the lives of kids just inspired me so much. The other thing too, being in an environment like that, that I forgot, was trying to mention earlier, is that I couldn't manipulate them. When I was in school, in any other environment, I like to get what I want. I would they would treat me like I was 16, but I wasn't 16. So I could get away with things. But in this professional environment of people who would say, I know what you're trying to do, Jessica. And I'd be like, whatever do you mean? So that was just the most eye-opening opportunity ever. And I'm really grateful. It was also an environment where I was able to get on medication and be in a regulated environment where the conditions are the same. We're monitoring my symptoms all day. So when I'm trying to get on medication at home by myself and keep track of like how they're affecting me can be a lot different than being in like this isolated mental health environment. But yeah, I can't emphasize enough how privileged I was to be in there. I 6 months, they usually you're in there longer than that, but I was itching to get out. And my counselor said that I had done a lot. And she was like, you could use another 6 weeks, but it's okay. You can go if you want. And I just will never, her name's Judith. I'll never forget her. She completely changed my life. 6 months of intensive therapy. And even if it's not inpatient, I know there's a lot of different programs that are like weekly programs where you're going all the time, having group therapy, doing individual sessions. Doing an intensive program like that, as much as like it was the craziest out of body experience of my life, I feel like I developed more in that 6 months than I did in those 16 years. It was amazing. I want to go again, actually. I want to go back. And it taught me so many
Um,
life skills. We were cooking. There was teachers who specialized in children with behavioral issues. I was able to, after that in school, they recommended certain accommodations for me into schools to help me not drop out again. So that I'm very privileged to have that opportunity and very privileged that it didn't cost my parents like $50,000 or something crazy. So Chef Casa House, Sherwood Park.
well, it sounds like the care that you received was really incredible, especially considering that you were a teenager that thought you knew everything and
Mhm,
didn't think that they knew what they were talking
mhm,
about. And yet you still gave it a try,
mhm.
right? You still, and you said you weren't allowed to leave. So I think I asked earlier, like, what made you choose to stay? But you corrected me there that because you were a
Well,
minor, you weren't allowed to leave.
well, I they could check us out. My parents could come on the weekends sometimes and check us out. So I wasn't allowed, yeah, as a minor to just come and go as I please. Could I have broken out of there? Yeah. But was there other kids that did so successfully? Yeah. Did they get taken back by the cops? Yes. But there was those really hard moments again where you have a really intense therapy session, you're crying, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to be here. I just want to lay on the beach and have no one tell me what to do ever again. But then you wake up that morning and I would look back at the last even 3 months that I was there and I was like, I can't give up on this because I know that this is I'm so privileged to have this opportunity. Who else has access to a mental health resource like this? It's very rare.
We as human beings, we often get so scared of our emotions.
Mhm.
Did you find that?
So my thing is tricky because I've always been very introspective and very self-aware. So I constantly was like, why am I feeling the way I feel? And trying to figure out why. So I never really found myself afraid of the way I felt because my first instinct was to figure out why I was feeling it in the first place. And I think this goes for a lot of things in life. Anything I'm afraid of, if I just learn about it enough, then it helps that fear. So when I was able to understand the way I'm feeling is because XYZ happened, and I'm like, oh, that's perfectly logical. And now I don't have anything to be afraid about. That was really helpful for me. But I do know when my mental health is very severe and I've been in some very dark places when I should have got therapy 6 months in advance, those are some times where I get very afraid of the way I feel because the negative voice in your head, that the disorder in my head, the problem in my head, that voice starts to get louder and it's harder to use my logic and emotional regulation to quiet down that voice. And that can be scary when it feels like that voice is like starting to be the main voice or starting to take over and more like your disorder is driving your life than you. And I think that's very terrifying, but mostly because that's when you're in too deep and there was so many opportunities to get help beforehand that I pushed off until it almost feels too late. And that's when you really have to double down and get into help immediately.
But I think you're a living testament to having waited a long time and then still being able to persevere,
Mhm,
still being able to get the help and have it be successful. It was
mhm,
just a hell of a lot harder
mhm,
later on than it
mhm,
would have been had you gone sooner, right? And
Mhm.
the reason I ask that question is because I think a lot of people are averse to therapy because they don't want to feel it.
Mhm.
It's like they don't want to deal with it. And underneath all that, disdain for not wanting to do it is this fear.
Mhm.
I am afraid of my emotions for a variety of reasons. Maybe I don't know how to handle them. Maybe I am afraid of the fact that they might take over. Sometimes people will feel like their emotions might kill them.
Mhm.
And so I think a really important message here is our emotions can actually hurt us. It's what we do,
Yeah.
how we react to the emotions that can hurt us, right? It's our behaviors that hurt us, it's our
Yeah.
choices that can end up hurting us. And so coming into an office or however you do your therapy, virtually or otherwise, just talking about it, you're going to feel a lot of things. Maybe you're not
Mhm.
used to feeling those things, but
Mhm.
they can't actually hurt you.
Mhm.
It depends on what you do with those feelings. So if you're in
Mhm.
a safe, controlled environment
Yes.
where you can have your feelings, and maybe some people they freak out and they yell and scream. Maybe they fall into a puddle on the ground and cry,
Mhm.
and maybe they cause conflict. Whatever it is, the emotion itself isn't going to hurt us,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's an important message to tell people.
Yeah, that is very interesting. It also can be scary when you can be afraid of your emotions when you don't know what they are. Like, what am I feeling? I know a lot of people who aren't able to distinguish between anger or fear or sadness or anxiety, and they can't pinpoint where it's coming from. So that, of course, that's scary. You don't know where, why, who, when, what. Another thing, though, I find interesting, and this happens with me a lot because I'm a very emotional person. I'm always talking about feelings. I'm talking about my feelings, everybody's feelings. There was a situation recently. I have a condition with my uterus and I might be getting a hysterectomy soon. And I've never been pregnant before. So part of me feels like I'm infertile. So I'm having a hard time grappling with the decision of if I get a hysterectomy, is it me making the choice to not be able to have children in the future? Or has my body already made that choice? That feeling, I feel it. I feel annoyed that I don't have the control of knowing, am I the one making this decision? Because it'd be a lot easier to make the decision if I know that I can't have kids in the first place, because then I'm just not having a period. But I was talking with, and this is common for men, a guy about it, and he was like, that's not logical, so don't feel that. And I was like, "No. The way I feel, regardless of if it makes sense, is valid, and I have to feel that, and I can talk about that. When I'm telling you the way I feel, the point is not for you to figure out a way for me not to feel it." And I find so many people, you can see the way that they view their own emotions when you talk to them about yours, and their first instinct is, "You've told me how you feel. Let's figure out a way for that feeling to go away," rather than, "Okay, you felt it. You can feel it. You can feel the emotion, process it, and then you can move forward and access your logical mind." Whereas a lot of people, as soon as that feeling comes forward, they're like, "Get it away from me." And they're still on the sidelines. You still haven't felt them yet. So I think it's really important to feel your feelings fully, and that's different than sitting around and feeling sorry for yourself. A lot of people think, like, in this situation with this guy who's saying to me, like, "Why are you gonna sit around and feel sad when, like, you're in pain, you want this surgery, et cetera," and I'm like, "It's a feeling. It's not supposed to make sense. It's not supposed to be logical." That's my logical side of my brain, but I can't just tell the emotional side of my body, "That's ridiculous. You shouldn't feel that," because it's my feeling. I can't tell my feelings how to feel, but I can logically say, acknowledge, "This is the way you feel, and that's fair." And that's another thing I always say to people is when they tell me the way they feel, I'm like, "That's fair. It makes sense that you feel that way. It's not wrong. It's not something you need to stop or something you need to go away. Feel it, but now let's talk about why. Let's talk about what else we can do. Let's talk about how we can uh, stop that feeling from having negative consequences in your life," stuff like that. I do know what you mean when people are afraid of their feelings because their first instinct when they come up is to make them go away, because people oftentimes think that feeling your feelings or experiencing them is ruminating or feeling sorry for yourself or dwelling.
Something you said, Jessica, triggered this thought of accountability. I
Mhm.
love how you talked about this piece around, has my body made this decision or am I making this decision?
Mhm.
And you're really contemplative and you're really introspective and you're really thinking about that. And I think there's a lot of accountability you're taking as a human being by thinking that way. Because it
Mm,
doesn't sound to me like you're taking this really difficult thing that's happening to you that's totally out of your control. And that's quite frankly really horrible to go through at
mhm,
such a young age. And you're not projecting blame outwards. You're saying,
mm,
like, okay, like this is what's happening. And I have to figure out how I'm going to make this decision and what this
mhm.
means for me. And I'm just curious, can you talk a bit about what you've learned about accountability over the years and how it's brought you to this place of being able to manage this difficult situation you're in right now?
Yeah, accountability is interesting, especially over my whole life and being older now and knowing that I have borderline personality, that I have ADHD, and looking at so many times in the past where I truly believed in my core that what I believed was true in fact and was true for everyone else. And a lot of my behaviors and the things I was doing I couldn't see at the time were like negatively harming me or negatively harming the people around me. I know there's so many people in my life that have tried to help me when I'm really unwell and I lash out at them. And I think therapy, I've had so many realizations looking back of, oh my God, I understand now why they said that. They weren't trying to do something wrong to me. So accountability is huge in being able to view your life experiences, situations that are stressful, removed and look at it from a different point of view, which you do when you're saying it out loud to a therapist. You're processing the way that the therapist is going to perceive it as you're saying it, which can make you come to so many realizations. So I definitely growing up too, coming from a really dysfunctional family and doing a lot of psychodynamic therapy, I still was placing a lot of blame on my parents, and I had a lot of resentment and was like, "All of my problems are because of you guys," because I went through psychodynamic therapy and learned that the reason that I'm opposed to authority is because of this situation that happened. Like, I can resort all of the things that have happened me back, but now as an adult going, "Okay, I'm now the parent here. I'm the boss of me. So it doesn't matter what's happened before. If you need a parent, if your parent didn't do XYZ and now you're feeling this, it's my turn now and I have to take over." And I think that's been really valuable as I get older. And just, it's so funny to think back to situations where you just truly believed in your heart and soul that you were correct and that what you were experiencing was the reality everybody else was. And through the insight of therapy, looking back and having a total different perspective and being able to take the accountability of going back to those people that maybe I've harmed, maybe I wasn't considerate enough of, or maybe even people who hurt me and I thought it was my fault. And I realized in therapy, actually, wait a second. And I can go back to you and say, you know what? This is how I feel. This is how you made me feel. And there's been instances where people went, oh, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I'll take note of that and I'll try to avoid that in the future. So it has been interesting as I get older taking accountability for your actions because I'm only 28, but even at 23, like, why am I viewing the world as if I'm the only person in it? It's so weird how even at 16, right? I thought this is as developed as I'll be. Like my brain is complete. And now at 28, I'm like, what is going on?
Borderline personality disorder is a really difficult disorder. A lot of them are, right? But this is emotionally so difficult. And especially when we don't know what's happening to us when we're teenagers or younger than that. And
Yes.
we're having these outbursts and we're trying to get people to understand us and they don't understand us. I'm curious about when you got that diagnosis
Mhm.
and what that was like for you and how you coped with it at the time and then how you integrated that into your life to present day.
Yeah. Borderline is a very tricky one. It was definitely the hardest diagnosis for me to accept. I have depression, anxiety, agoraphobia, ADHD, bipolar 1, and a borderline. Borderline was the last one I was diagnosed with. It is a very stigmatized disorder. It's oftentimes the diagnosis given to people who never get better because statistically, other than dialectical behavioral, they haven't really it's not been understood in the past, so they haven't really known how to help people with borderline. There was talks of it when I was 14, but they say that this is a lot of borderline behavior is just teenage behavior, so you'd have to wait to see if it continues into adulthood. But I remember when I was 14, it being brought up in a conversation and them saying, "But we're not gonna put this on paper. We're not gonna put this on paper for her best interest." And I was like, what? So then when I was 21, I was diagnosed with borderline traits. So they're like, let's ease her into this. And then finally, when I was 24, I was diagnosed with borderline. And it was extremely difficult for me. Thankfully, I was in intensive therapy at the time because being diagnosed with a personality disorder, my entire sense of identity, which is compromised by borderline personality already, my whole thing was, if am I just a disorder then? If everything about my personality is a symptom, then who am I? What am I? If the only reason I'm funny is because I have BPD, then am I even funny or am I just mentally ill? Is the only reason that people say that they feel comfortable with me and connect with me, is that just because I'm mirroring them? So I was going through every single part of who I am, my personality, which makes up who you are, and seeing how much of it was symptoms. And it took a long time for me in therapy to differentiate what is me and what is a disorder, and what is both of those put together, and being okay with that. Being okay with the reason that I'm funny is because I overshare. You don't have to have BPD to do that. Does the BPD maybe add on a little extra spice? Hey, that's fine. But it was very difficult for me. The way that I explain it is that, to me, it's a lot. I also have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I got the diagnosis 2 weeks ago. I forgot about that one. A lot of it for me was feeling like it feels like an attachment disorder to me. I always bring up the example of, you put a monkey in a cage, you raise a monkey in a cage with no human contact, that it's going to be a feral animal. But if you just give it a teddy bear, it'll have some level of empathy more than the monkey that had no human contact at all. And that ability to form bonds for me, I feel like, is compromised, because something I always felt with dating, with friendships, with family, is that I never fully connected with people. My glass always felt 3/4 full. And I thought the reason was because, oh, this relationship isn't meant to be. This friendship isn't meant to be. There's something missing with them. There's something missing with our relationship that I can't fully connect with them. So being able to learn over time and accept, which was very difficult, that that I will always feel that. And I'm okay with it. I'm able to know that, and it doesn't even feel like that anymore, because I'm aware of the fact that 3/4 is full. It doesn't feel empty to me anymore. It just feels like I understand the way that I work in relationships. And doing dialectical behavioral therapy, which is what I was referring to before about the emotional regulation, and when I start to get amped up, trying to calm down before I'm off my rocker, punching holes. No, I don't punch holes in TVs, but that's what it feels like I want to do when I'm so dysregulated. But it was a very hard diagnosis to receive because there is stigma in the mental health field. I could feel it when I talked to psychiatrists about the way that they talked about my behavior, or even acute suicidal ideation. They were like, yeah, this is just your borderline personality. Being suicidal is just a part of your life now. That was a very hard thing to accept, but it also, having the resource of other borderline people and knowing that I'm not alone, and knowing that other people, I used to think that something was so wrong with me. Why do I think, even when I'm not depressed, think about dying all the time? Even if I don't actually want to die, if I'm on the edge of a cliff, why is my mind having these like weird intrusive thoughts? So knowing why, like again, like fear of your emotions, knowing why was super, super important. But borderline is definitely the one that impacts me more than all of them combined, I feel. It is one of the most painful disorders ever, because emotionally, I feel things at incomprehensible levels, which I think is why I'm very introspective and self-aware, because I just have so many feelings that I need to understand what's going on, or else I'm just running around like a crazy person. It makes relationships extremely difficult. I can be very reactive. I am obsessed and infatuated with someone the next second, and then the next second I don't like them. I'm like, you're annoying me. It's been really valuable to know that it's not actually because they're doing something wrong or I'm doing something wrong. The way my brain perceives things is different, and I have to stop and make note of that. I need to stop and pause what I'm doing and sit back and go, okay, I realize that maybe I overreacted here. Or even when I'm really upset and I want to have that conversation, we're having a fight. I want to have this conversation. Forcing myself to go into another room and wait until I calm down, and then realize everything I would have said in that conversation would not have been logical. It would have just been completely emotional. But one of the most valuable things for me, and I was thinking about it when you were talking about doing check-ins, what I learned when I had borderline and I was trying to distinguish the difference between who I am as a person and all my diagnoses was just making notes, even trying to, because I have bipolar 1, trying to know if I'm going manic. That's another thing that's very scary for me is because I've had a psychotic episode before, I don't know what's real and not. Once I've had like delusions, I can no longer trust if what I perceive, if what I experience is reality. So making the note of even how many hours did I sleep last night? Oh, I'm starting to sleep less. Or, oh, I'm starting to sleep more. Does that maybe mean that I'm starting to get depressed? I've noticed that I'm eating less. Does that little stuff that I wouldn't pay attention to before, when I realized and sat down of what are the lifestyle things that start to change when I get depressed? What are my eating habits, my sleeping habits, my hygiene habits? And then that way, when I started going down that train, when I could start seeing myself get a little bit manic or being BPD, emotionally unregulated, I could see the signs and stop it before I got ahead. And I think that's one of the most valuable things ever.
Yeah, I agree with you. Stopping it before it gets out of hand
Mm.
is really important. But remembering that even if it is out of hand, there's
Mhm.
still healing available, right? And something that you talked about way in the beginning was this idea of having shame for
Mhm.
having human emotions or just being human in the world. And we grow up in, a lot of us grow up in dysfunctional families. If not everybody,
Yeah.
everybody's family
What
is
is functional?
right? Arguably, everybody's family is dysfunctional in some form, and that's okay. That's because there's no rule book. That there's a lot of books written on this.
Yeah.
That's from
Yeah.
the perspective of the author,
Yeah.
right? And you can read all the books you want, but there's no like guide for, okay, when said things happen, this is how you need to respond, or this is how you
Mhm.
need to behave. And families just do their best. Parents, I think, do their best. And uh, my hope is that most parents just do their best. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be great, certainly not going to be perfect. But we grow up in these families that are just trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And they're teaching us everything they've learned, but they grew up in families that were just
Mhm.
trying to figure it out. So
Mhm.
it's just generation upon generation of people just trying to figure it out, how the world works and how we're supposed to feel and what it's supposed to look like. And I think that one of the healthiest things that we can do is just recognize that there's no supposed to,
Yeah.
there's no should, right? It's just we have human interactions, human feelings. We are trying to manage our lives in the best way that we can. And that's all we know.
Yeah.
And so this shame for feeling human really, or for when I say feeling human, I all the things that encompass being a human
The
being,
good, the bad.
right? And we carry this shame around with us. It's a silent killer
Mm.
because often people will look at us, put a smile on their face, and they have no idea that we're feeling shameful in that moment, or we hate ourselves, or we think we're ugly, or this voice in our head, right?
Mm.
And so back in the beginning, you were talking about lying to yourself until you believe it.
Mhm.
And so let's take this shame for having these human feelings, which are totally normal and natural to have. And we're just responding to the environment that we grew up in and all we knew. And those messages that we get from our family of origin, or sometimes teachers at school, or friends who have their own worldview, who say, oh, you shouldn't feel like that. Like you were talking about talking to a guy about how you were feeling, and he said, oh, you don't need to feel that way. And that's from his worldview.
Mhm.
That's not even his fault. That's just what he thinks. That's what
Yeah.
he believes. But I think where we can gain a lot of our power, and I'd love to hear your opinion about this, is if we just strip away this judgment about how we're supposed to be or how we're supposed to feel or what it should look like and just be that, as long as we're safe or we're trying to be safe, right? And because sometimes in a psychotic episode, we're not safe and it's really
Yeah.
important that people intervene and help us out.
Yeah.
But in other circumstances, feel whatever you feel. And I want to get that message out to people to say, it's okay. It doesn't matter what anybody else says to you about how you should feel or the way it should
Yeah.
look. Just let's feel how you feel
Yeah.
and let's tell yourself that's okay. And you are totally acceptable as this human being that you are right now, broken, however you want to see
Yeah.
yourself, you're totally acceptable in that moment. And so, this piece about lying to yourself to believe it eventually,
Mhm.
I think that we're combating all of these bombardment of messages we've gotten all our lives
Yeah.
about how we should be. And so we have to turn that around. And this is why saying to yourself in the affirmations in the mirror, like you are beautiful or you are valuable, and you don't believe it in the moment. The truth is, you are those things.
Mhm.
We are those things. We don't believe it, but the truth is that inherently we are these things because we're alive. And so the more we say that, the more we combat these voices back here. And eventually it shifts. And that's why we believe it. And so I love that you talked about that because there's like a science that's intertwined behind what
Yes.
you're talking about,
Yeah.
right? The more you hear something, the more you're going to believe it.
Mhm.
So let's work on bringing the positive and not allowing the brain to repeat all these messages that these other people who honestly are trying to do their best have said to us in their lives, right? So I'm just
And
curious if you have any other thoughts about that piece
yeah, and I find that interesting too. Oh, fuck, I'm already forgetting what I'm saying. What we're talking about shame. What did you just say about
about being unapologetically the self and bringing in the positives until you believe it because you're combating the negatives
Oh,
that's been
okay.
told to you your whole life.
I was gonna say there's so many different words for it. Manifesting, prayer, reconditioning, cognitive behavioral therapy, affirmations. In every culture, in every part of the world, people think whether it's spirituality, whether it's just psychology, there's so many things. It works. Science has shown it. And the funny thing when you said you're reconditioning those pathways and you're retraining like your thought processes and you don't even realize it happens. I never realized that I started to believe the things I said until way after the fact. When I looked in the mirror and was like, I look good. And I was like, oh my, oh, I believe it. Oh my God. And I remember looking in that same mirror saying, I'm pretty and going, stop lying to yourself. But I'll lie to myself because if a therapist told me to lie to myself. And another thing, I'm a content creator. All my content is about being relatable and getting rid of shame. Having borderline personality disorder, oversharing, I rules are not really my thing. I've always been a shameless person. That's, I think, the number one word people would use to describe me. And it has been the most fulfilling, rewarding thing in the entire world to me to have all these people on the internet hear me talk about a random thing. To me, it's the most insignificant thing in my whole life. And I have people comment and say, this changed my whole world. I'm sending this video to my mom and my grandma and my boyfriend and my doctor, and you've completely changed the way I view myself, the way I view the world. So many people have so much shame about, like I was talking about before, intrusive thoughts, the way they feel, the relationships, the things they've done in their life without realizing that so many other people are in the same position. And you're both sitting there feeling ashamed and like you're the only one, and you could just tell each other, and then you would both feel fine. And it's interesting. I'm the type of person who I feel like I relate to everyone and I connect with everyone. And typically I'm not the person that feels like I'm alone. I'm very aware that everything I've ever experienced in my life, there's someone else who has too. So it's interesting when I post something that again is so insignificant to me. Just a little example is I was eating dinner and I was just saying, oh, like I'm hungry. I just posted a video of me heating up my food in the microwave and eating it. This video goes mega viral. Why? I was eating grapes. I put grapes in the microwave. Apparently other people don't do that. It was the biggest thing in the world. People thought it was the most insane thing ever. So something to me that is so insignificant, whether it's grapes or whether it's an intrusive thought I have, or it's a feeling or something I've done that I don't feel good about, sharing that with other people, even though that feels shameful in and of itself. And it can be hard when people react the way you don't want to react and they like reinforce that shame you're feeling. But it is just the most rewarding feeling in the entire world. And this is why I'll never stop doing what I'm doing when people say to me, this changed everything for me. And they're able to release that shame from some random TikTok on the internet. The social media is such an amazing resource because therapy is expensive. It hasn't been something that's been accessible for everybody for a very long time. So the fact that we can do things like this and we can have these conversations that are publicly accessible for people, I just think is so important because all of these things we're talking about here are very valuable. And as much as you said in the last 10 years, people are going to therapy a lot more. That's very true. It's amazing that people have access to social media and can really learn that all of these things that we're too afraid to talk about, if they're too afraid, if they don't want to tell themselves, they're not going to a therapist. But if they can come on my TikTok and see a video of me talking about borderline personality disorder, just explaining, for example, that little thing where I said it always feels like my cup's three quarters full, and people will go, that's how I can articulate it. That's what I get often too, is people say, I never knew how to explain it, or I never knew how to put it into words. And that's another really valuable thing in therapy, whether you're watching somebody else's therapy session or you're in your own therapy session. When you're able to put words into the things in your head, you feel invincible. You can do anything. So if you're doing that through therapy or you're doing that through just like your own research or watching therapists online, it is such a liberating feeling to get rid of that shame, get rid of all of that guilt, and maybe not all of it, because there's always stuff coming. There's always stuff you have to work through. But I really value you guys at Strength Counseling, especially for trying to get out there, get public, go on social media, and have these important conversations, because we could just have this conversation right now here between the two of us, or we could post this, 3 billion people could see it, and it could change lives. So I think it's very important to make therapy more accessible for people and for people to be not as intimidated by it. Sitting here, people can relate to Amanda and go, wow, I would love to sit here and talk with her and have these conversations where when you look at what therapy is in movies, you're sitting down on a couch and someone has their notepad and you have to tell them all the horrible things that have ever happened to you ever. But it doesn't have to be like that. It can be relatable. It can be chill. You can swear. You can have chill vibes. So I just really admire you guys for what you're doing. I thank you for letting me come on here and talk about it.
And in response, I really admire you for being so brave. And now you've already talked about this. So I was going to ask you a question about, like, how did you get to a place where you were willing to share these vulnerabilities for the world to see? Because it is a like BP, you
Mhm.
said that you have quite a few diagnoses, but BPD is, we talk specifically, it's a very stigmatizing diagnosis. And yet here you are telling us all about it and saying how therapy has changed your life. And
Mhm.
how did you even get to that point? Like, for
Mhm.
people out there who are really afraid to come out and talk about themselves, like, how did you get
Yeah.
there?
I feel inclined to lie to you right now, but I was just born this way. Truly, I think it's because I have borderline personality disorder. Everybody manifests it differently. I never cared what other people thought. I didn't have respect for authority. I didn't trust other people. So anybody's opinion or anything anyone said to me didn't matter. I didn't care. I grew up in quite a verbally abusive environment, so it doesn't matter what you say to me. I don't really care. So I am an oversharer, and I talk about how I feel, and it makes people oftentimes, sometimes, maybe I should say, quite uncomfortable, but it's always just been instinctual for me. And I've really been reinforced with the fact that when people call me things like brave or thank you for your vulnerability. But again, this isn't a choice. I didn't do anything. This is just, I'm just a product of my environment when it comes to this stuff. But it's been reinforcing me to keep doing it since I've been young, because when I say something that 20 people in the room go, this girl's crazy, but one person went, oh, and said to me like, whoa, that alone was like, I'm just going to keep doing this. I've always been a very open person. I've always been very vulnerable. And I don't even view it as vulnerability, because what are you going to do? I have BPD. What are you going to do? Tell me I'm crazy? Oh, I tell myself that enough already. It is very hard, especially, I guess I'm in a very privileged position too, where I don't have a conventional job. I don't have a conventional life. I don't have to deal with my boss being like, well, maybe you shouldn't disclose this, or maybe you shouldn't be putting this out there. But yeah, it doesn't, it's so easy. Here's the thing. It's harder for me not to be. Let's be fully real. It is extremely hard for me to not be vulnerable, to not talk about these things, to not have these conversations. But there are times where it's difficult for me, and I do get a lot of pushback for people, or people don't understand it. But because I've had the privilege of the audience that I do, and knowing that even if 2 million people hate a video, but one person said, my boyfriend watched this and then we haven't had a fight in 2 months because he understands how I feel now, that makes it all worth it to me. And even if you're not doing it to help other people, so I guess that's what I'm saying, like, the reason that I'm able to be this forthcoming with myself is because I know that it helps other people, but even if you're not able to do that, it's the most healing thing. People tell me all the time that I've helped them get rid of a lot of their shame and that they can go through the world, like, going to the grocery store with a pimple patch. I just love that people now in older generations, there was so much shame around silly things. Don't put your elbows on the table. Don't do this. Don't do that. There was these obscure rules of people need to fit into society, and these are the things that we subscribe to, but they didn't necessarily make sense. They weren't things you should be ashamed of. Whereas now, girls go out without bras and without makeup, and we can do things and not feel the shame that we used to. People go on TikTok and say the most absurd things ever that people used to think, oh, you could never say that and get a job. So society has moved forward so much in getting rid and getting away from that shame. The number one thing I always say, people will say to me in the street, people will say to me whatever, people will say to me in the street. The reason I say that is because I've done photo shoots in the street wearing minimal clothing. And people always say to me, aren't you ashamed of yourself? And my immediate answer is no, but I am so sorry that you are, because you're just projecting that on me and I don't have it. And it makes me feel really sad. That eats you up so much inside that when you see me not have that shame, it makes you feel bad because you have to sit and live with that other day. So it's not every day. It's not fair. Why should I not have to deal with that if you have to deal with it all the time? So I think that's a good way to approach people who say, do you have no respect for yourself? Aren't you ashamed? And I'm like, no, this doesn't make me feel ashamed of myself, but it breaks my heart that you feel like it does. So I wish I could take more credit for my vulnerability and my braveness, but I think that's just a disorder.
And I love your just raw honesty. And
Thank you.
I hope that more and more people can see your influence in the world and listen to how it influences them and how they feel in their own soul. Because if more people in the world were just unapologetically themselves, like you have been here today, the world would be a happier place.
Mhm.
What you said about people approaching on the street and saying, aren't you ashamed of yourself? That was brilliant because it is just a projection.
Mhm.
They might not agree with what you're doing, but who cares? This is
Mhm.
your life. This is brilliant what you're doing if it works for you,
Mhm.
right? And it is a projection of their own felt sense of the world, or the way they view the world. And it's not actually about you at all,
Yeah. I
right?
see that too when I've never been one for I'm a bit of how do I say this? I'm a bit of a I've never been a person that I'm not a modest person. And people will say to me, "That's disrespectful. Do you have no respect for yourself?" And my again immediate thought is, "You think your body is disrespectful? That just hurts me inside. You look at my body and see disrespect? This is just nature, and it just breaks my heart thinking that people go through the world and project their own shame and lack of respect for themselves that again product of the environment. That's just what they've been taught, but we're not taught to question those things. So they will, and again, it's like older women who will say these things to me, and it hurts my heart because they've never considered the fact that the reason they look at me and think that is because they feel that about themselves already. And that is what's sad here. That you have to live with the weight of feeling like if you showed your shoulders that you don't deserve respect. Like that's a hard way to live in the world. You have to feel like if you talked about the way you feel that people won't want to talk to you. Like that the amount of pressure that is, as much as it can be scary to be unapologetically yourself and put yourself 100% out there, to me what's more terrifying is not.
Yeah, said really beautiful. We're just winding down here, and I'm wondering for those who are listening here, if you have a message for them, say anybody who is noticing some changes in their life that they're not really comfortable with, noticing challenges in their mental health or just life in general, and seeing just how, again, unapologetically you came forward with this vigor and zest for life. That was just so beautiful to see. What's your message to them and how they can start to improve their lives and take accountability like you've done?
Hmm, man, I don't know. That's tricky. Therapy. It can be very hard. I think that's the asset to therapy is that when you're just starting out, when you're not even able to articulate the way that you feel, how are you supposed to work through it if you can't even understand it yet? So if you can sit in front of a professional and manage to get 4 words out, and then a professional is able to take that 4 words and help you get out all of the things that are going on in your mind, that is invaluable. And as much as it is definitely an investment to invest in your mental health, this is a good example. I was gonna book a trip to Mexico. I need to get away. I'm like, I'm gonna spend $2,000. I'm gonna spend a week in Mexico. I'm just gonna lay on the beach, and that's gonna help my mental health problems. And then I went, or I could spend $2,000 on therapy for the next 6 months and help myself for the next 3 years. So should I take the week vacation or should I invest that money? Because I'll sit here and say it's so expensive. It's so expensive. But then when I look at the things that I'm spending money on to escape my problems, to escape my stress, when I could just be investing money into learning how to cope with it now and tomorrow and the next day and the day before that. So again, therapy is just an invaluable resource in, even if it's not something that you do forever, even if you just do several sessions, or maybe you do it for a year, and that the information that I've learned throughout therapy is, as much as I say I need to go back and reinforce my skills, I'll have that information forever. I have those skills forever. I think the most important thing really is therapy, talking to a professional. And if you don't have access to resources like that, friends, family, and in my position, the internet. As scary as it is to go out there and just say how you feel to random strangers, you're going to find other people who feel the exact same way. And they might have resources and ways that they cope with things that maybe you don't know. And maybe you have ways that you cope with your problems that you didn't even know that was you coping. But there's someone else who has that problem and didn't know that was a coping skill available to them. So communication, it's tricky. But again, I admire strength counseling so much. And I think if anyone has any problems, you should be going to strength counseling.
Very good, Jessica. I also want to add to what you've just said in that my recommendation from a counseling perspective is
Mhm.
be honest with yourself. Jessica, you've shown here today that you're very introspective. You're very thorough in how you see yourself and how you explore. Is it me making this decision or is it something else making this decision? Or what's happening for me? What's the reason behind my behavior? And I think that the more that we pay attention to the what's and the whys
Yes.
of what's happening for us, the more it can lead us to a place of figuring out our own answers too.
Mhm.
And that might lead us to therapy, or maybe
Mhm.
we need to start there to start to unravel all the tension and everything so we can start to really learn about ourselves. But just like you said too, quite a while ago, you said sometimes I would just go and I would just talk and I would
Mhm.
overshare with this therapist and I would just figure it out myself.
Mhm.
But sometimes we need that position to see somebody so we can do that. Because I don't know about you, but in my understanding, not a lot of people feel comfortable sitting in front of the mirror and just talking like they would in front of a therapist.
Yes. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
tricky.
So I think that being really honest with the self and just paying attention to those tiny things like, wow, like last month I was feeling this way and this month I'm not feeling as good. What's happening?
Why?
Just ask yourself.
And I think that's the most valuable thing too, that I would say is why, even when I'm talking about the shame thing or being vulnerable with people, it's always why. If someone says to me, if I tell them I have borderline personality disorder and they tell me that I'll never be a good girlfriend, why do you think that? And when I really get down, when someone tells me, "Y you're not respectable because your dress is too short." Why? And when I sit down and I dig to the root of their logic, that's the way that I'm able to not feel bad about it, because when we get down to it, it doesn't make sense. They don't know why they're feeling the way they feel. Like, when I had that conversation with that guy about possibly getting this surgery and talking about my feelings, and his first instinct is, "Don't feel that." And my instinct is, "Why?" So I, again, just dig, "Why do you think that? Why do you think that?" And then when you come up with the answer of why you think that, why do you think that too? So I just think that knowledge is the most valuable thing ever. And one, you had said that a lot of people are very afraid of the way you feel. And I'm afraid of a lot of things, but if I'm able to learn about them and understand them, it's terrifying and you feel strong.
Mm. Yeah. Jessica, this has been such a pleasure to sit here with you today and
Yes, thank you,
chat
Amanda.
with you about all these really important things. And I think that you've given people who will watch this a lens into, and I know you said about vulnerability, but the vulnerable parts of
Yeah.
yourself that are just so easy for you to project into the world. And that's just amazing because I wish we had more of that because it will motivate others to do the same thing and really ask that why question or really seek out those answers, not just listen to everybody around them telling them what they
Mhm.
think. It's
Mhm.
what do I think? What's my opinion about what this guy is saying? What's my opinion about what this woman on the street said to me? What their opinion is. And you're just so confident in that. It's just really such a beautiful thing to see. And I'm really glad that it's easy for you because I just say share, do everything you can to just be unapologetically you because just wow, I'm just really moved by your interview today. And it's been great to meet you and get to know you a bit for sure.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
This is my favorite topic.
Yeah. On behalf of this agency and myself, thank you so much.